Hello, and welcome to Science on 7th, a virtual live stream where we talk about topics related to air quality and health. I'm your host, Pallavi Pant. In about 3 weeks from now, a lot of people are going to gather in Dubai to talk about climate action. The focus is going to be what have countries been doing since the Paris Agreement was signed, and where are we in terms of emissions reduction in response to the changing climate? And the energy transition is squarely in focus. Combustion of any kind, and especially of energy sources and fuels like coal or gas or even wood or charcoal, is a very important source of air pollution in countries around the world. It is also a source of greenhouse gas emissions, which have been linked with climate change. But what does the energy transition mean for air quality? Does it have any impacts on health? That's the topic we want to unpack today. And to do that, we have an amazing guest who's been thinking very deeply about air quality in relation to energy policy, and in recent years, thinking about the energy transition, about decarbonization. And we're going to talk a lot about all of these words and what they mean, and what that means for the health of the people in a different, in many different contexts. I'd like to welcome Dr. Wei Peng, who's an assistant professor at Princeton University. Welcome, Wei. We're really excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. So I think we're going to jump, right into it. There's a lot of words that get thrown around when we start talking about, climate action, and a big piece of that has been the energy transition. What is the energy transition? What do we mean by that, and what are we talking about?
Yeah, so energy transition is just a very broad term people have been using to describe the way that we're going to change how we use energy, likely switching from some old technologies to new ones. And in fact, this is not a new concept at all, because there was a time in the past that we didn't have electricity, we didn't have those gas providing heating to our home, we didn't have cars, we didn't have air conditioners. So really, we have already experienced energy transition in the past. But the issue today is that we have become so reliant and also comfortable with the way we use energy right now, all the infrastructure and the convenience it brings. And then the question is, what's next? What are the new technologies we're going to transition to, and how quickly?
Yeah, I really like how you describe it. And it is true. We've, lived through times when we weren't using certain kinds of fuels. And now we're at that, cusp of that situation again. And I think every time we think about energy transition, and I know in the US, but also elsewhere, the other thing that comes up pretty quickly is decarbonization. And what does that mean? What are we talking about when we say decarbonization? How does it link to the energy transition?
Yeah, that's a very key term. So I think decarbonization, broadly speaking, just means that we still want to get our energy service and the related utility, but hopefully emitting less CO2 and greenhouse gases. So when I was talking about what's new this time in terms of the energy transition, this is really the new thing. Right. So this time, we're really thinking about how can we transition towards those technologies that hopefully are good, but at the same time, emitting lower CO2 and greenhouse gases emissions, so that hopefully we're going to embracing a less warming world. And the good thing about the decarbonization, well, I wouldn't say good thing, but the promising aspect of the decarbonization is that thanks to the effort over the past few decades, we now have potential clean technologies almost in any sector. So in the power sector, we have wind and solar technology. That's the cost that's going down very quickly, and you hear about them all the time. And in the transportation sector, a lot of people now embracing electric cars, and that's a good form of alternative low carbon source. And we also have like public transport as another possibility for the transportation sector. Similarly, in the residential sector, we now have electric cooking, we have electric heating, and we also have heat pump. All those technologies are fairly new if you compare to the fossil incumbent technologies, but at the same time, they're emerging and it has proved to be cost effective in many circumstances. The industry sector is the most difficult one because when we talk about industry, it's actually not only one sector, right? Steel is different from cement. Cement is different from petrochemical. So we haven't really seen a technology that's going to solve all the problems in the industry sector across the board. But for every single major industry sector, there are emerging processes that people have found that we can still get what we want, but in a cleaner way.
Amazing. So I think we want to move away to cleaner sources of energy. So we're emitting less, and decarbonization is sort of the way we want to do it, or like the piece we want to focus on. And even, as you were describing the types of interventions in different sectors, you were referring to the reduction in emissions, which I think is a key piece. That's sort of what we are getting at. But what about the economic costs and the social costs that might come with decarbonization or, planning this energy transition over the next few decades?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. And I think on the upside, there are a lot of technology that the costs are reducing. So hopefully, when we talk about near future or a few decades from now, the economic cost of changing to those technology would be not that high. It's just like how we have initially any new technology come on board, they're expensive, but over time, as we use more, make more of them and deploy them, they're going to get cheaper. So that's one aspect of it. But I think the other important aspect of it is also that many people's livelihood now is centered around fossil fuel and the fossil fuel infrastructure. I do think that it's a crucial concern right now to thinking about how we can make sure that this transition is going to be fair and equitable, because you're definitely right. Climate is a important concern, but there are like many different aspects that also matter so much for people's life.
Yeah, I'm glad, you also like mentioned this piece about people's livelihoods, because I think in many countries that has become a critical part of the conversation around the energy transition. And in our previous live stream in October, we spoke with Dr. Anna Stoilovska, who's been thinking about energy poverty and like energy access in Southeastern Europe, where again, coal is a big contributor. A lot of people depend on the sector for jobs. I've seen the same thing in India, where coal is like a big industry, sure, but also a place where the companies are really responsible for managing local infrastructure. So this is so critical. But okay, we can think about the emissions reduction piece, and we can also think about the economic and social costs. And great to hear that that's going into the conversations. So now we come back to our topic, which is air quality and health. How does air quality fit into this? I'm assuming, as we adopt more technologies that, allow us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we see air quality benefits. But can you talk to us a little bit about, how air quality and health connect back to decarbonization?
Absolutely. So this is a great question. So climate problem is hard, and it's hard for different reasons. But one of the narrative that have been really pulling people back from taking action today is that, hey, you are asking us to change the we live right now and making sacrifices for the life of future population. And of course, I care about my kids, I care about my grandkids, but first of all, I care about me and my life right now. And in my view, that's a very fair consideration. And this is also where health can potentially be the connecting point. Because when we reduce fossil fuel consumption, we are not only reduce carbon emissions for the future climate, we're also immediately reducing those air pollutant emissions. As a result, we are really talking about cleaning up the air and also protecting the health right now, today. And to me, the health effects from clean energy transition is immediate. So it really shifts the perspective about we're not talking about future, we're talking about now. It also changed the perspective because it's really tangible. We're not talking about like polar bears struggling to live in the future. We're really talking about our health and the health of our family. And on top of that, I also think this health angle makes it personally relevant. So I have a 3-year-old son, and he has always been an allergic kid. So whenever we have very like high pollution days, he's just miserable. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one like really thinking about health, really thinking about air quality regarding like what does it mean for my family. And I'm sure that there are people who have their loved ones in a similar situation, for example, asthma or other like pre-existing health conditions. So I really think like making health is the way to make it like not only immediate but also tangible and also personally relevant. So it really provides a strong motivation for people to think about climate action today and hopefully change their perspective about climate action in a more positive way. And even better if we can motivate them to participate in this transition right now.
Yeah, I think this is such a crucial point. And I think more broadly, we're starting to have better conversations about it in terms of how do we really convince people to act, but also in ways that directly, benefit them or impact them. And health, of course, is constantly a big piece. We also have, been doing work around health impacts of air pollution. And one of the things that's always jumps out is people do care when their family members are getting affected, and there are things that can be done to fix that. Nobody wants an asthmatic family member who has to struggle through bad air quality. So I think, I want to go to one of the pieces of research you've published, because you've thought about this question in a really interesting way for the power sector. And I think we have an image, if we can pull that up, that kind of talks about the entry points for air quality and health. I feel like these are the conversations that we really need to be having more and more. So can you walk us through this? Like, let's take the example of the power sector, which I think you did in your paper. And you thought about then, like, okay, how do we think about air quality? How do we think about the health impacts? So, can you walk us through this? And can you also tell us a little bit about considerations that are obvious and some that may not be very obvious?
Yeah, happy to do so. And I think that we just talked about the broad picture, that how we can it's really helpful if we can bring health into the consideration. We're discussion about energy transition, but then the challenge really becomes every sector is different, every region is different, and there's also a question about who we want to protect. So this is why I really think it's important to start to thinking about what are the sector-specific and context-specific strategy in order to really facilitate that integration of health consideration into energy decisions. And here's one such example we have been thinking about for the power sector. The question is like, what are the high-level guiding principles we should be thinking about when we start to connect this to health and power sector decarbonization together? So we start with the first box, which is about displacing the old, because, for example, in this country and some other countries, many of the coal power plants are reaching the end of their lifetime. So there's a great opportunity here because we need to retire some of them, or many of them, in the next decade or so. So here, of course, cost is a consideration, but on top of that, there's also a strategic opportunity if we can target those highly polluting sources in densely populated regions, because those power plants have disproportionately high impact to a large extent.
Yeah.
And then the next piece is about building the new, because once we retire our power plants, we still need to add new power plants to meet our demand. And in the countries like China, India, or the developing world, the electricity demand is growing rapidly. So we definitely need to thinking about the new capacity. Here, the question is, what kind of new power plants are we going to build, right? Are we going to continue building more coal power plants, which unfortunately is still the case in China, India, and elsewhere? But there's also alternative here. Can we also strategically thinking about how can we start to build more wind, solar power plant, and couple that with end-use electrification efforts, so that ultimately we're going to both decarbonize the power sector and at the same time the end users. So that's the building the new piece. The next piece, the purple one, is about connecting the states. So this is where I find power grid really amazing, because it's not only about where we have the power plants, it's also about we have this really fantastic grid system that's going to bring the electricity from the power plants to the consumers. And the thing is, I live in New Jersey, here in Princeton, but at the same time, if we have a power plants being built or being retired in Pennsylvania, it's going to not only affect Pennsylvania, it will also affect me here in New Jersey, because we share the same electricity grid. And to make it even worse, If we change the power plant setup in Pennsylvania, because of the transport of wind, they're going to affect the pollution here, the air I breathe here in Princeton, because we're the downwind regions. So there are really cross-state linkages through electricity trade and pollution transport, making it crucial for us to thinking about those like multi-regional impact and how can we connecting the states so that we're going to see better future, healthier future, not only locally, but also regionally. And then I want to talk about the last piece, which is about protecting the pool. That's the red box over there. There's no doubt that we know, generally speaking, today, a lot of like dirty coal power plants are located in the places where we have lower income or minority communities. And that was really because the way we build the power plants or made our infrastructure design decades ago. And that co-location, like the decision regarding where we build those dirty facilities, largely lead to the inequity we observe today. But now we have a window of opportunity because we're going to shut down some power plants. We're going to build some new grid. So this is, in my view, this is really an emerging opportunity right now that we can potentially embrace to make sure that the way we build a new infrastructure is not going to lead those same mistake that we made in the past and having those embedded inequity in the way we build our infrastructure. So that's really my last piece, but in my view is also the more human-oriented and human-centered piece, which is can we start to place equity at the center of this low-carbon energy infrastructure design so that we can really make sure that our energy future is going to be also more equitable.
Yeah, and I think that's, such a critical point that especially if we are going to transition to newer technologies and newer solutions, then doing it in an intentionally equitable way. Otherwise, we're going to be dealing with the same problems, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And I think, you sort of paint a really good picture of like how to think about the energy transition and then decarbonization, and then focusing really sector by sector, looking at the variety of impacts. But the other thing that, has been so much in the focus this year is the way that climate change can impact our lives today. Just this year, flooding in places that has impacted lives of millions, wildfires that meant poor air quality in parts of the US that haven't seen bad air quality days in decades, perhaps. In other places, extreme heat events, which also resulted in poor air quality. So really, I feel like throughout the year, we've seen these very distinct and salient examples of how the changing climate is going to impact our lives, and also this interplay between climate and air quality, which seems to get stronger, and like which seems to be at the forefront of many conversations. But if we were to look ahead and think about our future, as there are changes happening with respect to climate, we continue with decarbonization, we are successful at it, hopefully.
Yeah.
What would that mean for air quality, both locally and perhaps at the regional scales in the decades to come? What does it look like 10 years from now, 30
Yeah.
years from now?
Yeah, so I think there are some positive aspects, but of course, there are also some negative aspects. I think the positive piece of this is that I think the countries are just going to clean up their air, no matter what, no matter it's because of climate motive or the clean air motive, because that's just like very important to people's life. And in fact, I grew up in China, and about 10 years ago in 2013, that was the year when the country declared the war against air pollution. And that was also the time that China started to introduce really a lot of clean energy policies as an important part of tackling the air pollution issue. Like we had the coal consumption cap. We also had a lot of like efforts to build up our renewable capacity, even build transmission grid to get them out, etc. So in my view, this is really the positive side, where because country care and people in general care about the clean air, I think we are going to see energy transition happening because of that. The question, of course, is about the speed. But then I think the more difficult part to tackle is that I think the nature of the air quality problem in the future will change, right? So if we so thinking about the world 2050, if we get rid of all the fossil fuel, then pretty much we get rid majority of the air pollutant emissions. But then if we're not acting fast enough as the world in total, we're not going to really solve the problem of wildfire. We may even see more of that. So I think that's exactly something we have been seeing in this past year. So to me, the more challenging part is recognizing that there's a race here, right? We need to act quickly in order to make sure that we get this like air quality co-benefits from clean energy transition immediately and locally. But at the same time, hopefully we are acting quickly enough so that the global climate system is going to evolve in a way that's not going to make wildfire flooding or other issues worse.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable. And it's been fascinating also to see how the research is evolving to address some of these questions.
Yep.
And I think we, as scientists, we always tend to think that, oh, there's so much we don't know, but there is a lot that we do know today about both, what's happening with the climate and what's happening with air quality. But from where you sit, where do you see the big gaps in our understanding? What are the areas related to the energy transition, air quality, the health impacts that we should be thinking about? And, are those relevant because science is relevant and we want to understand those processes better? And, what are some of those pieces that will also link back to our policy decisions?
Yeah, great question. So I think, Pallavi, you already said what I think is the major gap in science, which is we do have two things happening simultaneously. One thing is the changing climate. The other thing is that our response to climate change, like mitigation efforts, energy transition, et cetera, et cetera. I think what we already know that if we get rid of fossil fuel, we have climate co-benefits. But what we do not really know is that as we respond to climate change and start to embrace new technologies, what will be the emerging environmental impact and health risks associated with that, right? So we're going to have bioenergy use potentially as one solution, and that may disrupt the land use sector, and there may be new sources of emissions coming out from the land sector. And on top of that, we also know very little about the environmental impact of really new technologies like nascent technologies such as CCS or hydrogen. And there's also opportunity here for us to really start thinking ahead about what are the potential impact and how can we make sure that those like nascent technology will be cleaner in the future as well. And that's really one important part, like understanding how our response to climate change as it interacts with the changing climate will collectively shape the health future. And I think the other piece that is really difficult to do along the lines I was describing is how can we thinking about the various determinants of local impacts, right? So the air I breathe in Pennsylvania, the air I breathe here in Princeton, New Jersey, is not only determined by what we do in Princeton, has something to do with what New Jersey is doing in general and what Pennsylvania is going to do in terms of the transported pollution. And on top of that, because the local meteorology is affected by global climate, that also means that what happens in China and India will be relevant to my local air pollution and health as well. To me, that's really a very difficult part of the science question. Like, how can we thinking about this, like really complex drivers and cause-effect chains? But linking back to the question you were asking, Pallavi, like, how can we make this more decision relevant? So my broad thought on this is that traditionally we have been thinking that, we have to make decisions based on consensus in science. If it is just emerging science, we shouldn't use it unless it's absolutely necessary, such as COVID. We have to act quickly, even though we don't know the science. But energy transition is very different in a sense that I think we will always be in the middle ground where we know something, and there's a lot we don't know. But at the same time, we need to make decisions now, knowing that what the decisions we make today, the actions we take, will also influence the future. So I kind of think that there needs to be change in terms of what do we see as the important and decision relevant science questions. It's not only about the scientific pursuit. It's also about like working closely with the decision makers and stakeholders, thinking about what is the right amount, what is the level of confidence we need in order to make the decision right now, and also anticipating maybe there will be another policy window coming up a few years from now. Maybe we have a change in regulation or new review panel, etc. Can we anticipate that window of opportunity and lay out our analytical research in a way so that next time we can respond to that window of opportunity and act on that?
Yeah, I really like, this sort of way of framing the problem that we will continue to learn new things, from the science point of view. That is science, right? It's dynamic. We're constantly learning new things, but actively looking at opportunities to inform decisions or to have the right interactions with the policymakers so that science that is available today can be useful is so critical. But I want to switch gears a little bit. We've talked a bit about, the energy transition and the science, but you are a fantastic researcher. You've done really phenomenal work thinking about these intersections, and you're a mom, as you just mentioned. You're also someone who's very passionate about your work. You do a lot of communication, not just to scientific communities, but to broader audiences. And we really need more people like you, especially female leaders like you, to be doing this. And I think engaging a very broad spectrum of groups who are all going to be relevant in these conversations. So I want to hear from you, and I'm sure our listeners do too, that what are the things that give you inspiration? What are the things that give you hope? What keeps you going?
Yeah, great question. So thanks for the compliment, first of all. So I can share what is my inspiration as a researcher and what is the inspiration just as a person. So I think as a researcher, what really inspires me is that the clean technology are simply better. Right? If you're thinking about electric cars or electric stoves, like heat pumps, not sure if you have some of those, they're just better technologies. They're cleaner, no noise, limited maintenance. It's just like very cool technologies to use. And I think that's crucial. And that's really like makes me very optimistic, because if we need to convince people that you have to switch that technology to protect the climate, it's going to be a very difficult sell. But if we just say that, hey, that's just a better technology and hopefully not too expensive, that gives me hope in terms of this whole thing of transition into lower carbon future. And then really as a person, I think a lot of my optimism has a lot to do with my experience growing up. So I grew up in China, and it's just amazing to see how much change, positive changes that has already happened during my lifetime. And I'm just like 34 years old, right? So when I remember like having the first airplane to international travels in my hometown. I remember the first time we got our train station for high-speed trains. I remember getting the first subway station, a subway line in my city. All those things happen so quickly. And that really demonstrates if we have the right people, right incentive, doing the right thing, changes can happen quickly. And that really gives me hope and help me think that maybe reaching net zero is not out of reach. Of course, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that I'm still hopeful.
Fantastic. Yeah, I do like to hear, about like what's giving us hope, because there's so much, bleakness around us in these times. And I agree. I think, in even in just the last decade, I feel like there have been so many positive advancements. One could argue they're not quick enough, but we're sort of we're heading in a good direction. So as we come close to, this episode, is there anything that you would recommend the listeners to go watch or go read or go listen to that would, help them continue on this journey and learning more on energy transition and decarbonization?
Yeah, so one thing I would recommend is a TV show called Energy Switch by the PBS. The host is Scott Tinker, and they always invite two people come to the stage and debate about a critical energy issue, and I find it fascinating. And also, just a piece of self-promotion. I don't usually do this, but I think now is the right time. I was also recently invited to talk about China energy policy in one of their episodes with David Setlow from Columbia University. And the reason I think it's crucial is because there's no doubt China and the United States are the two most important players in the global climate energy space. But at the same time, due to geopolitical or other reasons, I just think there's so many misperceptions about the other country. And as someone who has been spent substantial amount of time living in both countries, I do hope that the episode where the communications we've been doing would be helpful to at least demystify or clarify what are some of the climate actions that is happening within China. So just a little bit self-promotion. Hopefully this will be of interest to the audience here.
Yeah, no, thank you. That sounds amazing. So, Energy Switch, everyone, on PBS. That already sounds really good. So, I think, what I'm taking away from this conversation is that first of all, the energy transition, this is not the first time in humanity that we're doing this. We've been through this before. Now we're thinking about how to do it so that we can live in a healthier future. And also that air quality and the health piece in particular can be really good hooks to connect climate action to why it matters to me, why it matters to my neighbor, someone I know from work. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Wei. It was fascinating talking to you. I hope we get to talk more in future on these issues. And congratulations on all of your work.
Thank you.
Everyone listening in, thank you for joining us. Join us for the last live stream of the year in December, where the HCI president, Dr. Alina Kraft, is going to be joining us. We'll take a look back at the year and look ahead into the future and what awaits us. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you in December. Thank you.
Thank you all.